My daughter pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me in the kitchen I had built with my own 2 hands and screamed, "Pay your $2,000 of rent or get out." I just packed a bag and walked out the front door. She thought she had won. She didn't know I owned the house, and she didn't know my first call was to a real estate agent. When the eviction notice arrived with her name on it a week later, she called me hysterical. But the response I gave her left her utterly speechless. Before I tell you how a father's quiet decision brought his daughter's world of entitlement crashing down, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And please hit the like and subscribe buttons if you believe that respect is something you earn, not something you inherit. The silence in the kitchen was heavier than the humid Austin air outside. My daughter Jessica stood with her arms crossed, her phone clutched in her hand, like a weapon she was ready to use. Her husband Tom leaned against the granite countertop, a countertop I'd installed myself one sweltering July, wearing a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was the architect of this little ambush, I could feel it. The spreadsheets were his language, a cold, clinical way to make greed look like logic. "It's simple," Frank Tom said, his voice smooth as polished stone. He slid a piece of paper across the island. It was a spreadsheet, of course. Columns for property tax, home insurance, utilities, even a line item for landscaping services, which was just me on my knees every Saturday pulling weeds. The monthly carrying cost for this house is just over $6,000. We're a family of 3, you're one person. Your share is $2,000. It's only fair. Fair. The word hung in the air, a perfectly crafted lie. This house hadn't had a mortgage in 15 years. My wife Carol and I had burned the papers in a little ceremony in the backyard, holding hands as the smoke curled into the Texas sky. She had called this house our fortress. Now her daughter was trying to turn me into a tenant within its walls. I looked from Tom's smug face to Jessica's. There was a hardness in her eyes I hadn't seen since she was a teenager, a brittle defiance that dared me to challenge her. This wasn't the girl I had taught to ride a bike on this very street, the one whose scraped knees I had cleaned and bandaged. This was a stranger wearing her face. "This is my house, Jess," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "Your mother and I paid for it. Every nail, every shingle. And now we're paying for it," she shot back, her voice rising. "We pay for the groceries, the internet, the cable. We're pouring money into this place while you just sit on your pension." The groceries she bought were artisanal cheeses and wine that cost more than my weekly budget. The internet was the high-speed package Tom needed for his work-from-home days, which mostly consisted of him taking conference calls on the back deck. They had moved in 6 months after Carol passed under the guise of helping me. Just for a little while, Dad, Jess had said, tears in her eyes, "So you're not alone." A little while had turned into 2 years. The help had turned into a slow, creeping occupation. First, it was small things, her scented candles replacing the simple beeswax ones Carol liked, Tom's golf clubs appearing in the hall closet. Then they repainted the living room a cold, sterile gray without asking. Last month, they had taken over the master bedroom, my bedroom, Carol's bedroom, claiming the stairs were becoming a hazard for me. I was now sleeping in the small guest room downstairs, a visitor in the heart of my own fortress. And now this. Rent. A demand for payment to live in a house that was legally, morally, and spiritually mine. Tom saw my hesitation and pushed the spreadsheet closer. "Look, we're not trying to be difficult, Frank, but we have expenses. Jess needs to maintain a certain image for her clients at the gallery. We can't do that if we're footing the bill for everything here." That's when it happened. The final clean break. A quiet snap inside my chest. It wasn't anger. It was something colder, clearer. It was the feeling of a carpenter finding a perfectly straight line on a warped piece of wood. Jessica, seeing my silence as weakness, stepped forward for the final blow. "Dad, Tom is right. We can't keep doing this. If you can't contribute your share, then you need to find somewhere else you can afford. This is our home now, so pay the rent or get out." I looked at the kitchen table, the one Carol and I had found at an antique market in Fredericksburg. I remembered us laughing as we tried to fit it in the back of my old Ford truck. I could almost smell the lemon oil she used to polish it with every Sunday. In that moment, I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for the memory of a life, the memory of a love they were trying to write a price tag on. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping softly against the floor. I looked at my daughter, at the stranger she had become, and I gave her the one thing she wasn't expecting: a quiet, simple surrender. "Okay," I said. The word was small, but it filled the entire room. Tom's smirk widened. Jess blinked, thrown off balance by the lack of a fight. "Okay, what?" she asked. "You're right," I said, my voice even. "It's time for me to go." I stood up, walked past them without another word, and headed to the guest room. They didn't follow. They were too busy celebrating their victory. They couldn't hear the sound of the tumblers in a lock they didn't know existed, a lock that was about to click shut behind them forever. They thought they were taking my house. They had no idea I was about to take their entire world. The guest room was more of a closet with a bed in it, a space designed for someone you didn't expect to stay long. I pulled my old suitcase from the top of the wardrobe, the one made of thick, honest leather scuffed from years of road trips with Carol. Its clasps clicked open with a satisfying metallic sound, a noise that belonged to a different, better time. Packing didn't take long. When you've lived 68 years, you learn that most of what you own is just weight. What truly matters can usually fit in a single bag. I started with the clothes. A few pairs of sturdy jeans, flannel shirts worn soft at the elbows, wool socks for the cold nights I knew were coming. I bypassed the suits and dress shirts hanging in the back. They belonged to a man who attended company dinners and award ceremonies, a man who believed his presence in his family's life was still valued. That man wasn't me anymore. My hands paused over a small cedar box tucked in the back of a drawer. I lifted the lid. The scent of old wood and memory filled the small room. Inside lay the photograph. Carol standing in the backyard by the oak tree we'd planted together, her hair caught in the summer wind, laughing at a joke I no longer remembered telling. Her smile was the truest thing I'd ever known. I carefully wiped a smudge of dust from the glass with my thumb and placed the framed picture face up on top of my folded shirts. She would ride with me facing the sky. Next, I packed my tools. Not the big ones from the garage, just the small essential ones. My father's hand plane, its wooden body worn smooth and dark from his hands, and then mine. I remembered using it to shave the bottom of Jessica's bedroom door when she was 7 after she'd insisted on a thick pink rug that stopped the door from closing. She had watched me fascinated, her small hand resting on my back. "You can fix anything, Daddy," she had whispered. I guess I couldn't fix this. I left the expensive watch Jess and Tom had given me last Christmas on the dresser. It was heavy, ostentatious, and always felt cold against my skin. Instead, I took Carol's old reading glasses still in their worn case on the nightstand. They were useless to me, my prescription was much stronger now. But holding them, I could almost see her sitting in her favorite armchair, looking up at me over the rims, a question in her eyes. I tucked the case into a side pocket of the suitcase. I zipped the bag shut. The sound was final. I walked through the house one last time. The cold gray paint in the living room felt like a stranger's choice. The new minimalist sofa looked uncomfortable, like it was designed for looking at, not for living on. This wasn't my home anymore. It was just a house, a collection of walls they were already claiming. I didn't look back as I closed the front door behind me. The lock clicked shut with a quiet thud. Sam Jones lived next door. His house was the opposite of mine, a little cluttered, warm-smelling of motor oil coffee, and a life that wasn't trying to impress anyone. He opened the door before I could knock, a wrench in one hand, his face a roadmap of concern. "Frank," he said, his eyes flicking to the suitcase in my hand. What did the vultures do now? There was no need for pretense with Sam. We'd been friends for 30 years. He'd helped me build the deck they'd just insulted me on. "They're charging me rent," I said. Sam swore a short, sharp word that was more punctuation than curse. He stepped back, holding the door wide. "The spare room's yours, as long as you need it. Helen left clean sheets in there last week." Helen was his wife of 40 years, a woman who understood kindness as a practical, everyday task. I stepped inside, setting my bag down in his hallway. The weight that had been sitting on my chest for 2 years, a dense, suffocating thing, seemed to lift just enough for me to take a full breath. I wasn't alone. And a man who isn't alone is never truly defeated. He's just regrouping. Sam's kitchen was a sanctuary of organized chaos. Tools that had no business being in a kitchen sat on a shelf next to a jar of pickles, and the air hummed with the steady, reassuring drone of an old refrigerator that had probably outlived a president or two. He poured me a second cup of coffee, the black, no-nonsense kind he favored, and sat down across from me at his small, scarred wooden table. He didn't press me for details. He just let the quiet do its work. After a few minutes, he set his own mug down with a soft thud. "You know, Frank," he started, his voice low, "something's been bugging me all week. Didn't want to say anything. Didn't want to stir the pot. But now—" He trailed off, his gaze fixed on something out the window, something only he could see. "What is it, Sam?" I asked, my own voice sounding tired, worn thin. He turned back to me, his eyes sharp behind his reading glasses. "Tuesday, around 10 in the morning. I was out back cleaning the carburetor on my lawnmower. Saw a car pull up in front of your place. A new Lexus, the kind that looks like it's apologizing for costing so much." He took a slow sip of his coffee. Man gets out. Suit clipboard. Had a logo on his car door. Austin Property Valuations. The name hit me like a physical blow. An appraiser. I felt the warmth of the coffee cup drain from my fingers. Sam wasn't finished. "The thing is, Frank, he wasn't alone. Your son-in-law Tom came out of the house to meet him. Saw them clear as day. Tom was doing all the talking, pointing at the roofline, walking the property edge like he was measuring it for a coffin. They were out there for a good half hour. Looked real official. And just like that, all the pieces clicked into place. The spreadsheet Tom had so conveniently prepared. The sudden aggressive demand for rent. The practiced, unified front from him and Jessica. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment argument that had gotten out of hand. This was a plan. A cold, calculated, premeditated campaign. They hadn't just stumbled into this confrontation. They had built the stage for it week by week, piece by piece. The demand for rent wasn't the goal. It was the justification. It was the opening move designed to make me look unreasonable, to make their next move, whatever it was, seem necessary. I set my mug down on the table, the ceramic making a sharp sound against the wood. The hurt I had felt just an hour ago was burning away, leaving something harder, colder in its place. It was the feeling I used to get on a job site right before a big storm rolled in. The calm, the clarity, the absolute certainty of what needed to be done to keep the whole structure from coming down. "They're not trying to get me to pay rent, Sam," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "They're trying to build a case to get me out. For good." Sam's face hardened. "The hell they will," he growled. "Not from Carol's house. Not while I'm still breathing next door." I looked at my oldest friend, at the unwavering loyalty in his eyes, and then I looked down at my own hands resting on the table. They weren't shaking anymore. They were perfectly still. "No, Sam," I said. "They won't." My decision was no longer just a reaction. It was a foundation, and on it I was about to build a fortress of my own. I left Sam's house with his words echoing in my ears, the phrase "real official" playing on a loop. It was one thing to be the target of a sudden, angry outburst. It was another thing entirely to realize you were the subject of a well-researched, premeditated plan. I walked back to my house, and let myself in the front door. The place was empty, silent. The scent of Jessica's perfume lingered in the hall, an unwelcome ghost. They were out for the afternoon, probably celebrating, convinced their little performance had worked. In the study, I pulled my old wallet from the desk drawer. It was worn at the folds, the leather soft as cloth. Tucked in a back sleeve behind a faded picture of Carol from our honeymoon was a business card. I hadn't looked at it in years, but I knew exactly where it was. David Chen, attorney at law, estate and property. As my finger hovered over the numbers on my phone, a memory came rushing back, so clear it felt like yesterday. We were in David's office a decade ago. The chairs were a little too firm, the air thick with the serious smell of old paper and leather-bound books. I'd been restless, complaining about the cost. "Carol, we're healthy," I'd argued. "We have time, this feels morbid." Carol had just shaken her head, her gaze calm and unyielding. She'd placed her hand over mine on the polished mahogany table. "Paper is more honest than memory." "Frank," she'd said, her voice soft but firm, "and it's more stubborn than feelings. We're not doing this because we think we're going to die tomorrow. We're doing this to protect the life we've built. A good will makes for a peaceful family, and clear title on a deed means no one can ever argue about who gets to come home." She had looked right at me then, and her next words were almost a prophecy. "You protect what's yours on paper, so you never have to fight for it with your heart." The memory faded as the line on the other end of the phone clicked. Law offices of David Chen. "Hello," I said, my own voice sounding steadier than I felt. "This is Frank Miller. I'm an old client, Carol Miller's husband. I need to speak with Mr. Chen." David picked up 30 seconds later. "Frank," he said, his voice the same as I remembered, calm, precise, with no room for unnecessary sentiment. "I was so sorry to hear about Carol. She was a formidable woman. I trust you're well." "I've been better, David," I said. And then I laid it all out. The slow invasion of my home, the demand for rent, the appraiser, the spreadsheet. I kept it factual, just the sequence of events the way Carol would have wanted. He listened without interruption. When I finished, there was a pause. I could hear the faint rhythmic tapping of his pen on a legal pad. "Frank," he said finally, "I'm looking at the Travis County property records right now. The deed for your address was transferred solely to you, Frank Miller, upon Carol's passing, as per the survivorship clause in your original purchase. The mortgage was satisfied and released in 2010. The house is yours, free and clear. Your daughter has as much legal right to demand rent from you as the mailman does." A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made my knees weak. So she can't force me out. Legally, absolutely not. "But that's not what they're doing, is it?" David said, his tone sharpening. "This isn't a legal strategy, Frank. It's a campaign of attrition. They're trying to make your life so uncomfortable that you give in just for some peace. They want you to believe you're a burden, so you'll hand them the keys to get out from under the weight of their help." "I don't want to fight, David," I said. "I don't want to be in a courtroom with my own daughter." "I know," he said. "Carol told me you'd rather build a bridge than burn one, even if the person on the other side is holding a gas can. So we won't fight. We'll correct. We'll do it quietly, quickly, and we'll do it in a way they'll never see coming." I leaned forward, my elbow on the desk. "How first we sell the house," David said, the words clean and sharp, "but not with a sign in the yard. It's called a pocket listing. I have an agent I work with, Maria Garcia. She's a ghost. She works with a private list of pre-qualified cash-heavy buyers who are looking for off-market properties in Austin. She can have that house shown, inspected, and sold before Jessica even notices the neighbor's dog is barking at a different car." Sold. The word was a shock, but it was also a release. "But the money," I started. "They'll see it in my accounts. They'll come for it." That David said, and I could hear the faint smile in his voice, is the second part of the plan. We're going to establish an irrevocable trust. We'll call it the Carol Miller Trust. The proceeds from the sale, all $900,000 of it, will go directly into that trust. You will be the sole lifetime beneficiary, which means you can draw an income from it to live on. But the money itself is owned by the trust, not by you. It's a separate legal entity. It cannot be touched in a lawsuit. It cannot be claimed by family. It's a fortress, Frank. The kind Carol wanted you to have. The Carol Miller Trust. He had used her name. The plan wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about honoring her legacy, about protecting the life she had envisioned. The life they were trying to dismantle one spreadsheet at a time. My breath came easier. The path ahead was no longer a dark, tangled wood. It was a straight, clean line. What do I need to do? I asked. For now, nothing, David said. Let them think they're winning. Let them feel comfortable. I'll call Maria. I'll draft the trust documents. You just keep being the quiet, compliant father they think you are. The less you resist, the less they'll be watching. And when they finally turn around, the house they thought was theirs will belong to someone else entirely. The coffee shop was on the far side of town, a small, anonymous place with mismatched chairs and the quiet hum of people who weren't there to be seen. It was the kind of place Carol would have called honest. I arrived 15 minutes early, a habit from my years on construction sites, where being on time meant you were already late. I chose a small table in the back corner, a spot that gave me a clear view of the door, but kept me out of the main flow of traffic. I ordered a black coffee and let it sit, its steam rising in the cool morning air. I was nursing the same cup when she walked in at precisely 10 o'clock. Maria Garcia didn't look like the high-powered real estate agents you see on billboards. There was no flashy blazer, no oversized designer handbag. She was dressed in a simple dark pantsuit that spoke of efficiency, not wealth. Her hair was pulled back in a neat, no-nonsense bun, and she carried a single slim tablet. She scanned the room, once her eyes sharp and intelligent, and walked directly to my table. "Mr. Miller," she said, extending a hand. Her handshake was firm, her voice calm and low. "I'm Maria Garcia. Thank you for meeting me." "Frank," I corrected. "And thank you for coming." She took the seat opposite me and placed her tablet on the table but didn't open it. She looked me directly in the eye, and I felt the distinct impression of a person who didn't waste time on small talk. David Chen explained the situation. She said, her voice dropping a fraction. He stressed the need for two things: speed and discretion. I specialize in both. I nodded, taking a sip of my now lukewarm coffee. He said you had a different way of doing things. I do, she confirmed. What we are going to do, Frank, is what's known as a pocket listing, an off-market sale. There will be no for sale sign planted in your front lawn for the neighbors and your family to gossip about. The listing won't appear on Zillow or the public MLS. It will, for all intents and purposes, not exist to the outside world. She paused, letting the words sink in. I maintain a private network of buyers, relocating doctors from the new hospital, tech executives from California, with cash offers, people who are willing to pay a premium to avoid the circus of a public bidding war. They value their privacy, and they trust me to bring them properties that fit their needs before anyone else knows they're available. I already have a young couple in mind for your house. They've been looking in your neighborhood for 6 months and keep getting outbid. I leaned forward, my hands wrapped around my coffee mug. How do you manage a showing without them? Knowing Maria's expression didn't change. David told me your daughter and her husband are typically out of the house on weekday afternoons. I will schedule one private showing. Just one. I'll tell the buyers it's a one-time opportunity. We will be in and out in less than an hour. They all sign strict non-disclosure agreements before I even give them the address. My reputation depends on my discretion, Frank. A single leak and my network vanishes. The plan was clean, surgical. It was exactly what I needed. It was a strategy built on the same principles I'd used my whole life. Measure twice, cut once. No wasted motion. No unnecessary noise. Okay, I said. The word felt solid, like a foundation stone settling into place. Let's do it. A small, professional smile touched her lips. She finally opened her tablet, turned the screen toward me, and brought up a listing agreement. Then let's make it official, she said. I'll make the first call as soon as we're done here. From now on, you just keep being the quiet man in the guest room. I'll take care of the rest. I was sitting on Sam's back porch, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the Blue Jays argue over the bird feeder when my phone started to buzz. I saw Jessica's name on the screen, and my stomach tightened. I let it ring twice, took a deep breath, and tried to sound like the defeated man she expected me to be. Hello, Daddy. Her voice was like warm honey, a thick, sweet tone she hadn't used with me since she was a teenager, asking for the car keys. Hi. I was just thinking about you. I hope you're doing okay. I stared at the peeling paint on Sam's porch railing. I'm managing Jess. Well, I found something that might be more than just managing. She chirped, the artificial brightness in her voice almost painful to listen to. It's this wonderful place called Willow Creek Estates. It's not what you think, Dad. It's more like a resort. They have a little 9-hole golf course, and a heated therapy pool, and even a bistro that serves happy hour specials. I said nothing. I just listened to her paint a picture of a gilded cage. I know you said you'd be out by the end of the week, and Tom and I just don't want you to have to worry about finding a place all on your own. It's so stressful. So, I went ahead and booked a private tour for us on Saturday. Just to look, no pressure, of course, but it's a chance to see what's out there. Saturday. That was 4 days away. The same day Maria was hoping to do her private showing. They weren't just pushing me out of the house. They were already building my next prison, and they were using my own well-being as the blueprints. Jess, that's very sudden, I said, forcing a weary tone into my voice. I know, but these places have waiting lists, Dad. A corner unit just opened up, and I didn't want you to miss the opportunity. She paused and then delivered the final polished lie. We just want to make sure you're safe and comfortable. We love you. The call ended. I set the phone down on the small metal table next to my chair. The sun was warm, the Blue Jays were squabbling, and the world kept turning. But her voice lingered in the air, the sticky sweetness of it clinging to everything. They weren't giving me a week. They were giving me an ultimatum wrapped in a brochure. The timeline wasn't mine anymore. It was theirs. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that if I didn't move faster, my next home wouldn't be one I chose for myself. It would be a corner unit with a view of a golf course I would never play. The truck smelled of old oil and Sam's unwavering friendship. I was slouched in the passenger seat, parked 3 houses down from my own, the engine off. My view was partially blocked by a neighbor's overgrown oleander hedge, but I could see the curb in front of my house, the one I had poured myself in the summer of '98. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Every nerve ending felt live, exposed. My entire future was balanced on the next 45 minutes. In my front yard, or what had been my front yard, Sam was methodically raking leaves into a pile. He was wearing his old grease-stained overalls and a wide-brimmed hat, the perfect picture of a retiree with nothing better to do on a Thursday afternoon. But his posture was alert, his movements economical. He was my lookout. My only line of defense if Jess or Tom decided to come home early from their important lives. We had a system. If a car turned onto the street, he would take off his hat and wipe his brow. If it was their car, he would drop the rake. It was a simple, silent language, the kind men build over years of shared projects and unspoken understanding. At exactly 2 o'clock, a dark gray Volvo sedan, the quiet kind of expensive, pulled up to the curb. My breath caught in my throat. Maria Garcia stepped out of the driver's side, looking as calm and composed as if she were arriving for a cup of tea. She smoothed the front of her blazer and waited. The passenger doors opened, and the buyers emerged. Dr. Eris Thorne was tall and lean with a kind, thoughtful face. His wife, Dr. Lena Thorne, had a warm smile that seemed to reach her eyes even from this distance. They didn't look like sharks. They looked like the kind of people you'd want living in your house, the kind of people who would appreciate the way the morning sun hit the kitchen window. That, for some reason, made my anxiety even worse. I watched Maria lead them up the walkway I had laid brick by brick with Carol 2 decades ago. I saw her unlock the front door with the key I'd given her and usher them inside. And then they were gone. The house swallowed them whole. All I could do was sit and wait and trust. The minutes stretched, each one a lifetime. I imagined them walking through the rooms. I could see them in the study where Lena would be running her hand over the built-in cherry bookshelves I had crafted for Carol as a birthday surprise. Carol had cried when she saw them, her hand flying to her mouth. "Frank," she had whispered, "it's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever made for me." I wondered if the Thornes could feel the love that was still in the grain of that wood. I pictured Eris in the kitchen, noting the solid oak cabinets, with their dovetail joints, a detail no modern builder would bother with. I had spent a whole winter on those cabinets, perfecting each one while the radio played old songs and Carol read to me from the newspaper. They weren't just cabinets. They were a testament to a life built with care, with patience. A life my own daughter now saw as nothing more than a line item on a spreadsheet. I glanced toward Sam. He was still raking his rhythm slow and steady. No hat wipe. No dropped rake. We were still safe. I saw them through the large living room window. They were standing by the fireplace, looking up at the mantel I had carved from a single piece of reclaimed timber. Lena pointed at something, and Eris nodded, his expression serious and appreciative. They weren't just looking at square footage. They were seeing the details. They were seeing the work. They were seeing me in a way my own family no longer could. The wait was agonizing. My palms were sweating my coffee from that morning, a sour memory in my stomach. What if they hated it? What if they saw the scuffs on the floorboards as flaws instead of history? What if they walked out and the whole plan collapsed? Then, after what felt like an eternity, the front door opened. 48 minutes. I'd been counting. Maria came out first, followed by the Thornes. They stood on the porch talking. I couldn't hear their words, and the not knowing was a special kind of torture. I watched their body language, searching for a sign. They weren't smiling, but they weren't frowning either. They looked serious, engaged. After a few minutes of conversation, they shook Maria's hand, got back into their Volvo, and drove away. The street was quiet again. Maria stood alone on the porch for a moment, her back to me. She took out her phone. My own phone, resting on the seat beside me, felt like a bomb. I stared at it, waiting for it to buzz, for the verdict to be delivered. It vibrated, the sound deafening in the small cab of the truck. I fumbled for it, my thumb shaking as I answered the call. Frank Maria's voice was as calm as ever, but there was a new energy in it, a tightly coiled excitement. "Maria." I managed to say, my own voice a dry rasp. "They loved it, Frank," she said, and I could finally breathe. Lena went on and on about the bookshelves. Aris asked me 3 times if the mantel was original. They see the quality. They feel the history. I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against the cool glass of the truck window. Did they make an offer?" There was a pause, a perfectly timed piece of theater. "Frank," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice now. "They don't want to risk a bidding war. They made an all-cash offer, $940,000, and they're willing to waive the inspection and close in 10 days. The number hung in the air, so large, so impossible that for a second, it didn't seem real. $940,000. It was more than a number. It was a key. It was an escape hatch. It was the sound of a fortress gate slamming shut with me on the inside and their greed locked out in the cold. I couldn't speak. I just leaned my head back against the seat and let the relief wash over me, a powerful cleansing tide. From his yard, Sam caught my eye. He lifted his rake in a small, silent salute. The game had changed. The pieces were all in place. All that was left was to say one final quiet checkmate. I held the phone to my ear, the plastic warm against my skin. $940,000. The number wasn't just a number. It was a lifetime of early mornings and aching backs. It was the 2 jobs I worked when Jessica was in braces. It was the vacation Carol and I never took so we could pay off the mortgage early. It was every quiet sacrifice, every unspoken worry distilled into a single clean figure. It was freedom. It was the price of the fortress Carol had always wanted for me, a fortress they had tried to turn into their personal bank. Maria's voice came through the line again, pulling me back to the present. "Frank, are you there? There's no pressure. We can counter if you'd like." "No," I said, and the word came out stronger and clearer than my own voice had sounded in years. There was no hesitation. There was no doubt. The path forward was a straight line, and I was finally ready to walk it. "No, Maria. Don't counter. Tell them yes. We accept the offer." "Excellent," she said, and I could hear the professional satisfaction in her tone. "I'll draft the purchase agreement immediately. With a cash offer and no contingencies, the 10-day close will be tight, but it's absolutely achievable. I'll have the initial documents ready for your signature in the morning." "Thank you, Maria," I said, and I meant it. Not just for the work, but for being the steady, competent hand I needed when my own world was shaking. After we hung up, I didn't move. I just sat in the quiet cab of Sam's truck, the engine off, and stared at the house. My house. For a few more days at least. It looked different now. The setting sun caught the edges of the roofline, making it glow. It wasn't a prison anymore, or a battleground. It was my last and greatest tool. It was the key to my own future. I started the truck, the old engine rumbling to life. As I pulled away from the curb, I felt a profound sense of finality. The wheels were turning. The plan was in motion. There was no going back now. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't want to. I was driving toward a future they couldn't touch, financed by a past they had tried to erase. The day after I signed the papers with Maria was a Tuesday. Jessica was at the gallery, and Tom had a synergy meeting downtown that would, according to his calendar on the fridge, last until at least 5. The house was quiet. It was the perfect window. Sam pulled his old Ford pickup into my driveway at precisely 1 o'clock, backing it right up to the garage. He didn't honk. He didn't have to. I was already waiting with the first box in my hands. We worked in the kind of quiet, efficient rhythm that comes from years of knowing how a man moves, how he lifts when he needs a hand, and when he needs to be left alone with the weight. These weren't just random boxes from the attic. These were the things that held the soul of the house. The things I couldn't let them touch, couldn't let them sell, couldn't let them throw away. The first box was heavy with photo albums. As I handed it to Sam, the lid shifted, and the corner of an old photograph peeked out. It was Carol, 20 years younger, standing by the lake with a 7-year-old Jessica on her shoulders. Jess was laughing, her small hands tangled in her mother's hair. Carol was looking up at her, her face filled with a kind of pure, unguarded joy that felt like a punch to the gut now. It was a photograph of a family that no longer existed, a family they had dismantled one careless decision at a time. "You all right, Frank?" Sam asked, his voice gentle. I just nodded, unable to speak, and pushed the box into his waiting hands. Next came Carol's gardening things from the shed. Her favorite trowel, the handle worn smooth and dark from her grip. Her old canvas gloves still stiff with dried soil from the rose bushes she had loved so much. I remembered her out there humming to herself, talking to her plants, as if they were old friends. "You have to get your hands dirty to make anything beautiful grow, Frank," she used to say, wiping a smudge of dirt on her cheek. I felt a lump form in my throat. I was getting my hands dirty now, Carol. I was doing it to protect the beautiful thing we had grown together. The heaviest was last. The old cedar chest from the foot of our bed, the one her grandfather had made. Sam and I carried it together, our footsteps echoing in the now emptier master bedroom. Inside was her wedding dress, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, and a bundle of letters we had written to each other during the 1 year I had to work a job out of state. "This is for the things that are too important to forget," she'd said the day we bought it. As we loaded it onto the truck, I looked back at the house. It was starting to feel hollow, like a beautiful shell with the life already gone. This wasn't just about moving objects. This was a rescue mission. I was saving the last pieces of our life together from a future where they would be nothing more than clutter in Jessica and Tom's perfectly curated empty world. "That's the last of it," I said to Sam, closing the tailgate with a quiet click. He just put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "She'd be proud of you, Frank, for doing this." "I'm not just moving boxes, Sam," I said, my voice thick. "I'm moving a life. Our life. And I'm not going to let them sell it for spare parts." The metal door of the storage unit rolled shut with a loud final clang, and in that sound I felt a chapter of my life close forever. The past was now secure. The stage was set for what came next. The quiet of Sam's spare room was a welcome change. For the first time in 2 years, the only sounds were the ones that belonged there. The gentle hum of the ceiling fan, the distant bark of a neighborhood dog. The work of moving the boxes, of securing the tangible pieces of my life with Carol, had been exhausting. But it had also been cleansing. With the past safely tucked away in a climate-controlled storage unit, I could finally focus on the future. That evening I sat on the edge of the simple, firm bed and opened my briefcase. It was time to sort through the papers I had left, the loose ends of a life I was preparing to neatly tie off. Most of it was old tax returns and car titles, the boring but necessary paperwork of existence. But at the bottom of a file labeled Household, I found a thin, forgotten folder. The label on it, written in Carol's elegant script, simply said, "Emergency card." I'd almost forgotten it existed. Years ago, when Jessica first went to college, we had opened a joint credit card for her. It wasn't for shopping or fun. It was purely for true emergencies. A flat tire on a long drive home, a medical copay she couldn't cover. We had told her to use it only if she was truly stuck. I hadn't seen a bill for it in a decade, and had just assumed she'd closed the account when she got married. But tucked inside the folder was a single unopened envelope from the credit card company mistakenly delivered to the house last month. I slid my finger under the flap, my curiosity piqued. I expected to see a statement with a zero balance, a dormant account. Instead, the number at the bottom of the page made the air leave my lungs in a silent rush. The balance was over $12,000. My eyes scanned the list of charges, and a cold, sickening dread began to pool in my stomach. It wasn't a list of emergencies. It was a ledger of their life, a life I was unknowingly financing. $450 at a restaurant called Le Beau Bistro, $800 at a boutique whose name I didn't recognize, $600 for a 2-night stay at the Serenity Spa and Resort. There were dozens of other charges: Uber rides, expensive coffee shops, online subscriptions to services I'd never heard of. I dug deeper into the old file, my hands starting to shake. I found other statements going back years. The pattern was undeniable. This wasn't a recent splurge. This was a long-term calculated deception. They had been using this emergency card as their personal slush fund for years. I thought back to 6 months ago when Jessica had sat in my kitchen, tears in her eyes, telling me they were struggling to pay for a car repair. She'd said it was just a few $100s, but it would wipe them out. I had gone to the bank the next day and pulled $500 from my own savings to give her. I looked at the statement in my hand again. dated just 2 days after that conversation, was a charge for $375. The Merchant Serenity Spa. The betrayal was so profound, so deeply cynical, it almost took my breath away. This was not just about the house. This was not just about entitlement. This was theft. They had looked me in the eye, pleaded poverty, and accepted my help, all while treating my name and my credit as their private, inexhaustible resource. Their demands for rent, their claims that they were shouldering the financial burden of the house. It was all a lie, a carefully constructed narrative to mask their own parasitic greed. The sadness I had been carrying for days burned away, replaced by a cold, hard anger. This changed everything. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was fraud. I laid the statements out on the bed, my hands steady now. I took out my phone and with the precision of a carpenter marking a cut, I took a clear photograph of every single page. I opened my email, attached the images, and sent them to David Chen. The subject line was simple: additional documentation. In the body, I wrote only one sentence. David, it seems the problem is bigger than we thought. As I hit send, the quiet whoosh of the email leaving my phone felt like the first shot being fired in a war I never wanted, but that I now knew with absolute certainty I was going to win. I didn't wait for David to reply to my email. Some actions can't be delegated to lawyers not because of the law, but because of the soul. They have to be done by your own hand with your own voice. I picked up the most recent credit card statement, the paper still feeling slick and foreign, and dialed the number on the back. The automated menu was a maze of polite robotic prompts, a system designed to wear you down before you ever reached a human. I pressed 0 repeatedly, a small act of defiance, until the system finally relented and a live person came on the line. "Thank you for calling," a tired voice said. "My name is Brenda. How can I help you?" "Hello, Brenda." I said, my voice as calm and steady as I could make it. "My name is Frank Miller. I need to report a series of unauthorized charges on my account and place an immediate freeze on all cards associated with it." There was a pause, the sound of typing. "Okay, Mr. Miller. Can you verify your address and the last 4 digits of your social security number for me?" I gave her the information. "Thank you," she said. "Now can you tell me the date and amount of the last charge you believe to be fraudulent?" I looked down at the statement, at the long list of their indulgences, and a bitter laugh almost escaped me. "Brenda," I said, my voice low, "the last authorized charge on this account was for a college textbook for my daughter in the fall of 2010. Every single transaction since then has been fraudulent." The silence on the other end of the line was different this time. It wasn't procedural. It was human. I could hear her take a small, sharp breath. I see, sir," she said, her professional tone now laced with something else. "Pity maybe, or just surprise. I am placing an immediate freeze on the account. The secondary cardholder, a Jessica Miller, will no longer have access. The account is locked." "Thank you," I said, and ended the call. I had just cut one of their lifelines, a small, invisible act of rebellion that they wouldn't even notice until the next time Jessica tried to buy a $5 latte and was met with the cold, hard wall of a decline. I stood up and walked to the window of Sam's spare room. My old house was next door, the lights blazing in the kitchen, where they were probably deciding on dinner. My gaze drifted to the calendar hanging on Sam's wall. Today was Wednesday. Maria was filing the last of the sale paperwork tomorrow. The closing was scheduled for Monday morning. The new owners, the Thorns, would take legal possession on Tuesday at 9 a.m. sharp. 6 days. In 6 days, their world, the one they had built on my foundation, on my credit, on my silence, would cease to exist. They were in there right now, laughing, making plans completely oblivious to the fact that they were living on borrowed time in a house that was already sold. The trap was set. All the pieces were perfectly in place, and all I had to do now was wait for them to walk straight into it. The title company's office was on the 7th floor of a downtown building in a conference room that felt like it was designed to absorb emotion. The walls were a neutral beige, the table a polished, unforgiving slab of dark wood, and the only art was a framed abstract print that looked like a storm at sea. It was fitting. I sat on one side of the table with David Chen. On the other sat Dr. Eris and Dr. Lena Thorne, the new owners of my life's work. A polite, efficient woman named Susan, the closing agent, sat at the head, a thick stack of documents squared perfectly in front of her. The air was still filled with the quiet, reverent hush that only precedes the signing of legally binding papers. Susan guided us through the final pages with a calm, practiced voice. The HUD statement, the deed, the tax forms. It was a litany of numbers and clauses, a legal map of the transaction that would change everything. I listened to each word, but my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking of Carol, of the day we signed the first papers for that house, our hands trembling slightly, our hearts full of a future we thought we could predict. When it was my turn, Susan slid the final signature page in front of me. "Right here, Mr. Miller," she said, pointing to a line at the bottom. I picked up the pen. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than any hammer I had ever held. This was it, the final irreversible step, the point of no return. My hand was perfectly steady as I signed my name, Frank Miller. The ink was dark and definitive against the crisp white paper. It wasn't the shaky signature of a confused old man. It was the firm, confident signature of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Dr. Thorne signed next, his own hand, just as steady. We looked at each other across the table and exchanged a brief, respectful nod. He didn't know my story, not all of it, but in his eyes I saw an understanding. He was a man who appreciated things that were built to last. Susan took the papers, her notary stamp hovering for a moment, before coming down with a solid, satisfying thud. The sound echoed in the quiet room. It was done. Not with a shout, not with a fight, but with the quiet kiss of ink and rubber on a piece of paper. The fortress Carol and I had built was no longer mine. But as I stood up from the table, a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt safe. I shook Dr. Thorne's hand. "Take good care of it," I said. "We will, Frank," he replied, his grip firm. "We will." As David and I walked out of the office and into the bright Monday morning, the city felt different. The air seemed cleaner, the sky wider. The papers were signed. The funds were transferred. The house had a new family. All that was left was to inform the old one. Sam told me about it later over a shared pot of his brutally strong coffee. He described the scene with the detached clarity of a man who's spent his life watching engines and knowing which sounds mean things are working and which sounds mean they're about to break. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of bright, cloudless day in Austin that makes you think nothing bad could ever happen. The sky was a clean, endless blue. Sam was on his front porch just as I'd asked, pretending to read the newspaper, but really watching my old house. At 9 a.m. sharp, a Travis County Sheriff's car pulled quietly to the curb. It didn't use its lights or siren. It just arrived, a simple, undeniable fact. A moment later, a modest sedan parked behind it, and a woman in a crisp business suit got out. This was the representative from Sterling Property Management, the firm the Thornes had hired. Sam said they walked up the path together, their steps synchronized and purposeful. They didn't look like they were expecting a fight. They looked like they were delivering a message that had already been signed, sealed, and sent. Jessica answered the door. Sam could see her through the screen. She had a coffee mug in her hand and a lazy, self-satisfied smile on her face. It was the smile of a person who believes they've already won. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice carrying across the quiet street. The deputy, a tall man with a calm, weathered face, was the first to speak. Are you Jessica Miller? Tom appeared behind her, already annoyed by the interruption. What's this about? He asked, his tone laced with the impatience of a man who believes his time is more valuable than anyone else's. The woman from Sterling stepped forward, holding a professional-looking portfolio. Good morning, she said, her voice polite but firm. My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm with Sterling Property Management. We represent the new owners of this property. Sam said the change in their expressions was something to behold. Jessica's smile didn't just fade. It collapsed. Tom let out a short, sharp laugh, the kind a man uses when he's trying to dismiss something that's already lodged in his throat. New owners, Tom said. I think you have the wrong address. This is my father-in-law's house. Not anymore, sir, Ms. Jenkins said, unflappable. She opened her portfolio and produced a document. The property at 124 Willow Lane was sold yesterday. The closing was finalized and the deed was recorded with the county this morning. I'm here to serve you with an official 30-day notice to vacate the premises. Jessica just stared, her face draining of all color. She looked from the paper to the deputy and back again. Sold, she whispered the word, a tiny, fragile thing. No, that's not possible. I assure you it is, Ms. Jenkins said. The deputy took a small step forward, his presence alone adding weight to her words. Tom found his footing in anger. This is insane. It's a scam. Our father is an elderly man. He must have been manipulated, coerced into signing something he didn't understand. Sir, the deputy said, his voice flat, and even the voice of a man who has heard every excuse. We have a copy of the recorded deed transfer. The owner of record is now the Thorne Family Trust. Your father-in-law, Frank Miller, was present at the closing, was represented by his own legal counsel, and was found to be of sound mind. The sale is legal, final, and binding. Every word was a nail in the coffin of their reality. Jessica finally found her voice, but it was high and shrill, cracking with panic. No, he can't do this to us. This is our home. We live here, ma'am, the deputy said, his patience wearing visibly thin. Your living arrangement was with the previous owner. That arrangement is now terminated. Your argument is with him. Our only business here is to ensure this notice is served. He held the paper out to her. You have been served. Jessica wouldn't take it. She just stood there, shaking her head as if she could refuse reality itself. Tom finally snatched the paper from the deputy's hand, his face a mask of fury. You'll be hearing from our lawyer, he snarled. Your lawyer can contact Sterling Property Management at the number provided. Ms. Jenkins said, already turning to leave. You have 30 days. I suggest you use them wisely. Sam said they stood in the open doorway for a full minute after the deputy and Ms. Jenkins had driven away, just staring at the piece of paper in Tom's hand. They were no longer the proud conquerors of a family fortress. They were just two people standing on a porch that no longer belonged to them, holding an eviction notice with their names on it. And then Sam told me the shouting began. Not at me, not at the world, but at each other. It was, he said, the sound of a foundation finally cracking. A foundation they thought was made of solid rock, but was only ever built on my silence. The call came at 3:15 in the afternoon, right when the sun was hitting the back porch, making the wood feel warm. I was sitting in Sam's old rocking chair, watching a hummingbird investigate his feeder. I saw Jessica's name flash on the screen. I let it ring 3 times, just long enough to let the silence on my end gather its weight. Then I answered. I didn't even have a chance to say hello. What did you do? Her voice was a shriek, a raw, ragged sound stripped of all its practiced sweetness. It was the sound of pure, undiluted panic. There are people here, Dad, a sheriff's deputy. They're telling us to get out. They said the house is sold. This is some kind of sick joke, right? You have to fix this. Call them right now and tell them there's been a mistake. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting her torrent of words wash over me. I looked out at Sam's yard at the steady, unbothered way a bee was working on a patch of clover. "There was no mistake, Jess," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "What are you talking about?" "This is our home," she screamed, the word tearing at the edges. "No," I said, still quiet. "It's not your home anymore." The silence that followed was a chasm. I could hear her ragged breathing on the other end of the line, the sound of a world tilting off its axis. "I don't understand," she finally whispered, the rage giving way to a dawning, terrified confusion. You can't just sell it." "Jess," I said, and I let my voice carry the weight of 2 years of quiet observation. "I'm a little confused. I thought this was exactly what you wanted. What are you talking about?" And then I delivered the line I had been rehearsing in the quiet of my own mind for days. I gave her back her own words, polished and sharpened into a weapon she had forged herself. "You stood in my kitchen in front of your husband, and you gave me a choice. You said, 'Pay the rent or get out.' Well, Jess, I'm a man of simple means. I couldn't afford the $2,000 a month you were charging me to live in my own home. So I did what you told me to do. I got out." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was taut. "I just took my house with me." I heard a sound on the other end of the line, a small, choked gasp, like she'd been punched in the gut. The line was dead quiet for a full 10 seconds. Then a different voice, Tom's, full of blustering rage. "You think you're so clever, you old man. You can't just kick us out. We have rights. We'll sue you. We'll contest the sale. We'll tell the court you're incompetent, that you were manipulated into this." The threats were so predictable, so hollow. He was firing blanks and he didn't even know it. I let him finish, and then I deployed the weapon they never knew I had. "You can certainly try that, Tom," I said, my voice dropping into a register that was as cold and hard as steel. "And when you do, my lawyer, David Chen, will be more than happy to present the court with a few items. First, the results of my recent competency evaluation, which I passed with flying colors. And second," I let the pause hang in the air, a perfect empty space, "he'll present 12 years of statements from our little emergency credit card. He's especially interested in the charges from the Serenity Spa, Tom. They seem to line up perfectly with the times Jessica was crying to me about how you two couldn't afford to fix the car. I believe the legal term for that is fraud." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a man who had just run full speed into a concrete wall he didn't know was there. I heard a muffled noise, a strangled sound. Then Jessica was back on the phone, her voice completely different. The rage, the panic, it was all gone. All that was left was a thin, broken whimper. "Dad, please." It was too late for please. The time for please was when she was laughing at my expense, when she was planning my obsolescence, when she was standing over me as I fought for my life. "It's done, Jessica," I said, and my voice was devoid of all emotion. It was the voice of a judge reading a final verdict. "You wanted me to disappear from your life. You have your wish. As for your new housing situation, I believe the new owners will be expecting the rent. You have 72 hours before they change the locks." I didn't wait for a reply. I ended the call with a quiet, deliberate tap of my finger on the screen. The connection was severed, and in the profound, ringing silence that followed, I finally truly felt free. I didn't see what happened next with my own eyes. Sam filled me in later, though he didn't seem to take any pleasure in the telling. He said he stayed on his porch just long enough to see the first cracks appear, and then he decided his hydrangeas suddenly needed a lot of attention. He said that after the call ended, Jessica stood in the doorway for a long moment, the phone still pressed to her ear, as if she were listening to a dial tone that contained the rest of her future. Her face, he said, was a blank mask of shock. Tom was the first to move. He snatched the eviction notice from her hand and read it again, as if the words might have changed. "This is a bluff," Tom said, his voice a low growl. "He's trying to scare us." Jessica finally lowered the phone, her hand trembling. A single sharp, hysterical laugh escaped her lips. A bluff, Tom. Did you hear him? The credit card? He knows about the credit card. That was when the blame started, a bitter, venomous torrent. This was your brilliant plan, Jessica hissed, her voice a raw whisper that was somehow louder than her earlier screams. You said he was a weak, sentimental old man. You said he would fold as soon as we applied a little pressure. Me. Tom shot back, his own face pale. You were the one who couldn't wait. You had to have the house now, had to have the money. Now I told you to go slow, but you just had to push him because we're drowning, you idiot, she cried finally, throwing the phone onto the entryway table. Because your ventures are bleeding us dry. The house was supposed to be the safety net. We'll find a lawyer, Tom blustered, but the confidence had evaporated from his voice. We'll fight it. That, Sam said, was when Jessica really laughed. A hollow, broken sound that carried across the lawn. With what money, Tom? She asked, her voice dripping with scorn. She pulled her wallet from her purse and threw a platinum credit card onto the table next to the phone. I tried to book a moving van while I was yelling at him, just in case. Declined. I tried the emergency card. Declined. They're all declined. Sam said he watched Tom's face crumble as he pulled out his own phone, his fingers frantically tapping at his banking app. He didn't have to say a word. The look of pure, cold dread that washed over him was answer enough. My quiet phone call to a customer service representative had done more damage than 1,000 angry arguments. I hadn't just taken their future. I had dismantled their present. They were no longer conquerors standing in their new castle. They were just two people trapped in the beautiful entryway of a house that no longer belonged to them, with no money, no leverage, and the very real threat of legal action hanging over their heads. The fight was over. All that was left was the collapse. A week later, I found myself back in David Chen's quiet 7th-floor office. The city of Austin hummed below us, a distant, muffled sound. Outside the large window, the sky was a clean, pale blue. The storm had passed. David slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the polished table. The gold lettering on the front was simple, elegant, and final. The Carol Miller Foundation. This is the last piece of it, Frank David said, his voice soft. Once you sign this, the funds from the sale are permanently transferred. There's no going back. I looked at the folder, but what I saw was Carol's face, her hands in the garden, the look in her eyes the day we burned the mortgage papers. She had believed in building things that last. Jessica and Tom had only believed in things they could spend. I finally understood that the house was never the true inheritance. The real legacy was the values we had built within its walls. The money was just the raw material, the lumber and nails to build something new that honored her spirit. It's not for them, I said as much to myself as to David. The money, I mean. It was never really about punishing them. I know, David said. Revenge is a temporary satisfaction. A legacy is a permanent one. He opened the folder. The mission statement was a single paragraph we had worked on together. To provide scholarships and tool grants for students entering the trade schools of Central Texas, honoring the dignity of working with your hands. It was simple. It was honest. It was everything Carol and I had ever believed in. I picked up the pen. It felt light in my hand, now no longer a weapon, but a tool for building. As I signed my name, I wasn't thinking of Jessica's panicked screams on the phone or the look of utter defeat on Tom's face. I was thinking of some kid I would never meet, a young man or woman with calloused hands and a dream getting a letter in the mail that said someone believed in them. I was turning my family's ugliest moment into someone else's brightest opportunity. I pushed the signed document back across the table. A profound, unshakable peace settled over me. It wasn't the thrill of victory. It was something deeper, quieter. It was the feeling of a debt being paid not by them to me, but by me to the memory of the woman I loved. The battle was over. But it wasn't their downfall that defined my victory. It was this: the quiet act of creating something good from the wreckage. Carol would be proud, Frank David said, closing the folder. I looked out the window at the vast Texas sky, and for the first time in 2 long years, I felt the warmth of the sun on my face. I think I said, a small smile finally reaching my lips. She already is. True family is built on mutual respect, not one-sided entitlement. When your love is treated as a resource to be spent, setting firm, quiet boundaries is essential. It's not about revenge, but about preserving your dignity and teaching that consequences are a more valuable inheritance than unearned wealth. Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who took you for granted? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.